Since 1947, the United States Marine Corps has been helping Santa fill his sleigh, making happier holidays for deserving children right in your community. Go to toysfortots.org and learn how you can make a difference.
This is AM 1220, KTLV, Midwest City, Oklahoma City, and streaming audio at KTLV1220.com.
This is Oklahoma Voice with Jonathan Clour on KTLV 1220.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight on the show, we have a special political lineup. On the program, we will have the newly elected state chairman of the Oklahoma Republican Party, Pam Pollard. She will be weighing in on the issues and discussing the state of the Oklahoma Republican Party. But first, our featured guest. This evening, we are extremely fortunate to have Arizona State Senator Carlyle W. Begay joining us. Lately, Senator Begay has made national news due to the change in his party affiliation. He is also Navajo, and he will be discussing his reasoning behind changing parties to better serve his native people, his district, and the state of Arizona. Senator Begay, welcome to Oklahoma Voice.
Well, thank you very much for having me on this evening.
You're very welcome. We're thrilled that you could join us, and we're looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you again, and I look forward to some perspective and the big decision last week and offer any insights that I may be able to give.
Excellent. We want to get to know you a little bit better before you share your big announcement with us. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Tuba City, Arizona. It's about an hour away from where I spent the majority of my childhood. I was actually born kicking and screaming. Was delivered by my father, and he often jokes about that experience. But my childhood was very much unique in that I grew up in a very rural tribal community, an environment that is probably what many would consider third world living conditions. But not, I think, in a situation where my community, my family were forced to live. It was an environment where we had no running water, no electricity, raised by parents or then grandparents who had no formal education. My grandmother, as an example, never stepped foot a day in her life in a classroom. Never learned how to read or write or speak English, and very much an environment based on a traditional and cultural-based Navajo environment, and then grew up and had the opportunity to also grow up when I got older in a very different westernized world in Flagstaff, Arizona, and which is junior high, high school, in an area about 2 hours away in north central part of Arizona. And so I guess you would say in two completely different worlds.
Yes.
One culturally based and one more westernized, and very unique and different upbringing.
Has that been a challenge walking in both of these worlds?
I say it's been a blessing because being raised by grandmother, as I mentioned, that really had no exposure to the broader world around us. She had a unique perspective and a wisdom that I still reflect on today, especially because I remember the memories, so I'll kind of give you an idea of how I grew up.
Uh-huh.
My daily duties in the morning, the first thing I did when I woke up were to prepare the animals, to feed the animals, the horses and the dogs, and get ready for the day. And then I spent the majority of the entire day taking care of our ranch or livestock, and would watch over the lamb and sheep and goats that would graze in a valley that I grew up in. And my grandmother would be with me most of those days. and in those moments, the memory that I have the most that I share and reflect upon are the stories that she told me about my ancestors, about the history of my people, and the relevancy of how that really defines who I am as a Navajo or a Diné today. And I'll give you an example. So I grew up in a community called Black Mesa, and specifically in a valley called Longhouse Valley. Longhouse was named because of an era when the U.S. military and the U.S. government viewed my ancestors and my people in the way of progress. And the military at that time in the 1860s, early 1850s, viewed the ability to take care of the Navajo problem by marching our people from across the Southwest to an area called Bosque Redondo in New Mexico. And Longhouse was named because there's a military outpost that was a long building in the ancestry lands of my ancestors that still stands today. The structural architecture of the building still stands today. And it was a constant reminder of the plight of my ancestors, the resiliency of my ancestors, but a constant reminder of who I am, again, as a Navajo.
Powerful words. Did you live on the reservation?
So I spent the majority of my childhood on the reservation, speaking primarily Navajo through my grandmother, and being ingrained in a very culture-rich environment. But also, my parents, my father, we moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, and I spent my junior high and high school, as I mentioned, in Flagstaff, going to school, going back and forth. And I'll give you one experience that I remember. In junior high school, I remember spending the entire afternoon with my grandmother and herding sheep and goats. And I jumped on an airplane. My dad worked for a company that flew back and forth sometimes from Black Mesa to Flagstaff. And jumped on the airplane, and 45 minutes later, I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona. But I remember one moment in particular where the attorney for the company my dad worked for leaned over and said, it's really unique that in one instant you could be herding sheep with your grandmother, raising livestock, speaking nothing but Navajo, but in 45 minutes you could be in a completely different world. And it was kind of then that I realized that I was growing up in two distinct culturally based environments, and didn't think of distinction between the two until at that point. And I've spent the majority of my life bridging two different worlds, and still feel like I do that today, because I go back home and much is still the same. And obviously, in the position that I have, I'm still trying to build and bridge worlds that are very different in many ways.
That is extremely admirable, and I'm sure your constituents look up to you because you've put in that tough work, and you've had to work hard for a living, and you've had to work with your hands. So many of our elected officials and leaders, they haven't had that experience, but I'm sure they look up to you because you have lived in this way. Am I right?
Yeah, and I'm giving an example. When I was raised, my grandfather, who was a local community leader, was elected in the local government, as well as my father. When given the chance, he would reinforce this idea of self-empowerment through, as an example, I remember when I went to the store, when I would ask for a candy or an ice cream or a small toy, he would take the moment to remind me not to say or think the mindset of, excuse me for the translation, but it's in Navajo, we call it sha, meaning give me, or me, or can I have a handout type of perspective. Instead, he would say, an or anhe, which means you yourself or us as a people. It's up to us. It's a mindset of self-determination and self-empowerment. And he would say, nothing in this world is free, and nothing will be given to you. You have to earn it. And so, as I grew up, and especially in the past 2 years, as a Democrat, I was born in a family, that were all largely Democrats. My entire family are all registered Democrats.
As many of our native people are.
Yeah, and especially in my district, where 52% of the registered voters in my district are Democrats.
Wow.
And so many people have criticized my decision as an opportunist. And I kind of laugh at that because, if it was about the position or the title, why would I switch parties to be in a significant minority?
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like my decision was based upon the future of the communities that I represent, the future of self-determination, of self-empowerment, and especially for the generation of the youth of these communities. And I'll talk about that a little bit later,
sure.
But it's something that I feel is needed in terms of the cultural shift in mindset and perspective.
Yes, and I'm really wanting to flesh that out here in a couple minutes. I know that you're a young guy. Hey, how old are you? And are you married? Do you have any kids?
So I am 34 years old, and I am married. We have a child who is 4 years old, and we, like my wife, I think my wife jokes with me. She grew up in a more rural community than I did. She thinks that I had a different upbringing because of my experience of growing up in Flagstaff.
Mm-hmm.
She spent the majority of her entire life on the Navajo Nation, but also went and got an education and spent some time away and went back. And so we're very blessed to have a great family.
Now, speaking of your family, which member was it that was a leader in the community that you just talked about?
So I've had a number. So my grandfather, my dad's dad, was a community leader. And my father was a local community leader, as well as my uncle. My uncle was a leader for the Navajo Nation Council, which is the legislative branch of our tribal government for a number of years. And so I had a lot of leaders in my family, and that definitely had an impression in my life growing up. My father and grandfather would drag me to meetings as a little kid, I remember, and remember the moments where I was bored out of my mind, but the perspective that it gave me always left an impression. And an example of that would be when we would leave some of these meetings, my grandfather and father would take a moment to ask me the relevancy of the issues that were being discussed, but more importantly through the perspective of, when you grow older, how will you address these issues? How will you want to make a difference for our people and for our community and for our family? And so I definitely had a different perspective of encouragement and mentorship growing up. But I feel like in my position now, that's why I feel like I have such a tremendous amount of responsibility and duty to give back to my community because of the instructions that I was raised with as a child growing up.
Wow. When did you personally take up an interest in public service, specifically politics?
Well, I went to the University of Arizona for college, and my ambition in college was to become a doctor, and my undergraduate degree is in molecular and cellular biology, and had a great mentor in Tucson, Arizona, and she truly had an impact in many ways, and I say that because she opened so many doors for me. She truly was a mentor, kept me accountable. But I had an opportunity to design my own research program when I was there, very much involved in research and then in public health. My senior year, when I graduated, I had time off before I would have entered into medical school.
Mm-hmm.
She made me apply to a program in Washington, D.C., and a program called the Barbara Jordan's Health Policy Scholars Program, the fellowship. And so I was accepted and spent some time in D.C., working in D.C. And it was that moment and that experience in D.C. that really forever changed my life. In that experience, decided not to go to medical school. Decided to spend the majority of my outlook in policy. So the reason for that is because I'll give you a story.
Mm-hmm.
The first day I met the congressional representatives that I worked for, it was about a 10-minute introduction of talking. Then she gave me her first task. She had an interview on CNN later that afternoon and asked me to write some talking points. And I said, okay, well, I'll do what I can. Do not know anything about that issue. I'm 21 years old. And,
wow.
and so, wrote up what I thought was appropriate, thinking that she probably knew what it was that she was going to be interviewed about, and gave it to her and turned on TV later that afternoon. She read word for word everything that I wrote as her talking points.
Mm.
And I remember just thinking, wow, I'm 21 years old. I barely know anything about this issue beyond what I was able to research. And she just recited everything on national TV. And that was, I think, a important point in realization in the terms of the influence in policy making. Someone like me from a very disadvantaged community, disenfranchised community, a community that probably isn't expected to do very much, and to do that whole experience in sitting in rooms full of congressional representatives. Never once were there tribal representatives or leaders at the decision-making table voicing their concerns and perspective of the unique issues and needs that our tribal communities face. And it was then that I realized that the true ability to make a difference is in policy, is in perhaps business. So I came back and went to graduate school, started working, and had been hooked in policy for the rest of my professional career. And 2 years ago, I was presented with the encouragement by many to run for office, and so threw my hat in the ring, and so here I am today.
Was that a scary process for you?
It was, because there's definitely a difference between being involved in the policy-making process and helping to influence that,
mm-hmm. versus
being in the decision of a representative and a leader. And the distinction, I remember when I had my first committee meeting, I now recognize, now sitting in a different position, that now your voice matters. Now, and good and bad, what you say, what you do is representative of the communities that you truly represent. And so it's been a learning curve. It's been a tremendous and definitely an experience that I say is humbling, because my life in general has been based on this perspective that you always have to make the most of every opportunity. And so I've put a lot of energy and effort and passion into the position and trying to create a voice and trying to advocate for the needs and concerns of the district that I represent. Mm. And I'll probably talk about my decision here in a minute, but it was trying to change the dynamic of the policymaking process.
All right. We're going to pause right quick. Folks, if you're just now tuning in, you are listening to Oklahoma Voice with Jonathan Clour. We're sitting down with Arizona State Senator Carlyle W. Begay. He is discussing his legislative positions on his district and discussing issues with his native people. Senator Begay, I know that you have created a video, and this video has gone viral. It contains your big announcement, your big message, and you discuss the native tribes of Arizona, and you talk about the issues facing our native people. I know that your district encompasses the Hopi and Navajo reservations, and with you being Navajo yourself, you've seen firsthand some of the issues and pressures our native people face. Could you please give us a description of your Senate district?
So I jokingly say that my Senate district, or our Senate district, is a blessing and curse. So there are 7 counties in the district that I represent, or partially or whole. There are 15 counties throughout the entire state of Arizona. So I represent almost in part or whole half of that. I have 8 very different and distinct tribal communities in our district, including the entirety of the Navajo Nation within Arizona. Largely tribal. 69% of my district consists of tribal communities. And each tribe is different, culturally, language, and traditionally. They're very distinct and very different. We had a meeting with the governor just this afternoon with all the tribal leaders in the state, and it's really unique in the different issues and perspective the tribal leaders bring to the table. And so in the position that I have to try to be a voice in all these issues, but also from the prism that each community is very different.
You know, in your video, it is quite clear that our native communities deal with different issues that are separate from perhaps, let's just say, the rest of your state. And in your video, you stated that rural and tribal communities are in a crisis with unemployment at its highest, with close to 80% unemployed. How has this affected the dynamic of your district?
Well, and that was really the reason why I made the decision of switching parties, because I felt like, my district is a district that has long been ignored and overlooked in our political making process here in Arizona. We jokingly say Arizona is the state of Maricopa, which is Maricopa County, which is where Phoenix and all the surrounding cities are located around, or Pima County, because the majority of the representation by demographic is essentially located in Maricopa County or Pima County. And so there's truly a lack of voice and representation in the demographic and diversity of the state. And so from a Democratic legislator for 2 years, was a Democrat, I always thought of myself as a Democrat. My family and the friends were all Democrats, and largely because of this perception that, Democratic Party, the Democratic legislators were champions of the little guy, the underrepresented. And when it was just the opposite, it seemed, because I was trying to advocate for communities that were underrepresented, trying to address issues through the merit of the issues and not through the political lens of the ideologies of our party. And I'll give you an example. We are in a state of crisis, as I mentioned, when it comes to education. And so for me, this one key issue last year was a defining tipping point, because we have the highest concentration of low-performing and failing schools in our state, in our tribal communities. We have the highest dropout rate. We have the lowest graduation rate in our communities. Just about 2 weeks ago, I spoke at reservation tribal community school. Of the 64 high school seniors this year, only 4 of the entire senior class had a GPA of over 3.0.
Wow.
This is the future of our community. And so I advocated last session for a program called the Empowerment Scholarship Account. It's a school choice initiative, created a program to empower families and their children to basically fit education around what they best feel is in the best interest of their child. They can use funding to enroll in private school, be homeschooled, online, whatever they think is best. And I was ridiculed and criticized by my caucus party for championing a school choice proposal because as Democrats we're supposed to support only public education policies. But for me, I looked at it as, why do we have to debate the issues through the perspective of the system, not through the perspective of simply just trying to improve quality education?
It seems like that might have been a critical moment in your decision to become Republican. Had that always kind of been in the back of your mind, or did it just really come on all of a sudden?
It was a culmination of a few things. So the Empowerment Scholarship Account legislation was part of it, and I received a tremendous amount of support from the Republican Party for the program. Just as an example, when I was championing the bill through the legislature last year, honestly, I thought at the most we would have gotten 20, 30 families apply, and because there's no such thing as school choice in the communities that I represent. And so I was thinking, well, maybe we get a few families that are eligible and enrolled. The superintendent of public instruction, which is an elected position statewide in our state, was very willing to work with me, and I appreciate her leadership to offer a 4-week special enrollment period. And in the 4 weeks this summer, there were over 240 applications submitted with little notice, with little outreach or education about the program.
Uh-huh.
And I was amazed. I'm like, wow, 240 families applied for a program where school choice largely does not exist. That's powerful. And so it was that was partly to the point. The other was I was the only Democrat to vote for a all-Republican budget, $9.1 billion last year. And the investment that we got out of the budget, and the reason I voted for it was in the social media, and the critics last session criticized me. As an example, one of the items was $1.2 million for transportation to the Navajo Nation. And people were saying, well, Senator Begay sold out for a mile of road. You know, what does 1.2 miles buy you? Well, in truth, the 1.2 miles maintained 1,600 miles of unpaved school bus routes in the Navajo Nation. 1,600 miles. So for me, it wasn't about 1 mile of road. It was the little investment we can have to make a big difference. We had other investments the first year that were made specifically in the budget. My vote would have never changed the eventual outcome of some of the cuts that were made to education, public safety, child safety. But given the opportunity to position myself to finally put our communities, as I mentioned, long overlooked and ignored at the decision-making table, and finally get some investment into these areas of the state, was well worth that vote. Mm-hmm. And why I feel like I was elected to be a voice for these communities, again, that have been ignored.
Going back to your video and going back to some of the issues that our Native people face, you also stated that some of our tribal territory does not even have clean running water and lacks electricity. Does this affect the progress of our Native people?
Well, it does. infrastructure investments, as an example, are directly tied to economic development. The lack of infrastructure impedes the progress that these communities can have an opportunity to pursue. The severity of education and the gaps in the educational attainment presents a challenge for the future workforce of these communities. So for me, we've got to look at the future of these communities through the lens of what investments, what political support can we get today that will in the future have long-standing impacts. And it really has been the Republican Party that has been willing to listen, willing to come up to my district and to see and to touch and to feel. The governor went to my district, state leaders went to my district in August, and it was powerful for them to see, because when they were able to see that people live on dirt floors and have to haul water, and water isn't so readily available, it gives you a completely different perspective than people in Maricopa County or in Phoenix, who simply can go home, turn the faucet on or flick the light on and not think about where that resource comes from.
Well, how has the Republican Party benefited you and our Native people? What solutions have they brought to the table? And you were kind of hinting at some. What are some other solutions that they've brought?
Well, a part of that has been a solution of looking at policies that empower these communities. And I say that in programs in the areas where there's a long-standing return on investment of some of these resources. I'll give you one example. Right now, the tribes throughout the state contribute directly in sales tax. We term it transaction privilege tax. It's our form of sales tax here in Arizona. The tribal communities, as an aggregate, between 2002 through 2014, contributed directly $453 million directly to the state. Again, $453 million. And based on the state funding formula for sales tax, the tribes didn't get one dime of that back.
Well,
counties and cities contribute to the formula for sales tax and get a portion of that back in return. But there's a tremendous inequity in what tribes contribute. Some of the tribes are the largest employers in their region. As an example, just right next to Scottsdale, Arizona, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, I think I heard a report, is the 16th largest employer in the state of Arizona, contributing directly to the vitality of the state, the financial welfare of the state. But what return on investment do the tribes get? And so we finally are getting tribal state leaders, the governor and state leaders, who see that as an equity, that the future of the state of Arizona is going to be dependent upon this investment of some of these dollars back in the form of infrastructure, in the form of education, in the form of workforce development programs. These are all programs and policies that empower communities, not more social programs. Those are needed, but the policies that I care about are policies that empower our communities and have a return on investment like infrastructure.
I see. Senator Begay, we have on the line one of our Oklahoma State representatives, Representative Paul Wesselhoff. I believe he is a member of the Potawatomi Nation, and he is active, I believe, in the tribe, and also serves as our state legislator. And I was going to try to bring him in on this conversation because he has a remarkable past, and I think both of you guys could really have seen some of the same things. So
they can't go on together.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just getting word from the control room that Representative Wesselhoff will be on here in just a couple minutes. So, Senator Begay, we're going to go ahead and continue. I had another question for you. And you say that the Republican Party is bringing progress. And that might be hard for some of our Native people to believe, and that might be really hard for some of our Democrats to believe. But is the Republican Party really bringing progress?
Well, there's definitely been no shortage of criticism and critique about my decision. And I knew full well that there would be going into making the decision, and made sure that before I made it, I sought advice and input from a number of different leaders and constituents. But for me, I've simply begun to ask many constituents and leaders who are critical about my decision, just fundamentally asking, so why are you a Democrat? Why do you feel like the Democratic Party is representing our voice and our needs, and is representing the future of our communities? And there are many that don't have an answer in a way that, at least in terms of looking at it from moving our communities forward. Mm-hmm. There's definitely perspectives of the history of both parties, both negative and some positive. Even as an example, some would criticize me and think, "Are you now part of a party that promotes even presidential candidates that view Native Americans as a group that has no future?" No, my principle of ideology in supporting the Republican Party is based on this mindset that I was raised with, that I now realize is an important part of the future of our communities, of self-empowerment and self-determination. As tribes,
Do you want Paul to call back on another night? Just shake your head. Okay, we'll tell him.
I argue sovereignty is truly exercised without self-determination, without being self-determined for our own welfare.
Mm. As we're closing our conversation, you talk about the vision of the Navajo people and the vision of our Native ancestors. And you say that the state that we're living in today isn't quite what they had in mind. How do we preserve this vision that our ancestors had for our future generations? And how do you, as a Navajo leader, as a legislator, keep that vision alive and to bring it to life on the Senate floor?
Well, the voice of our ancestors was a voice of resiliency, of empowerment, a vision of communities that have a true belief in themselves, that we no longer view ourselves as a community or as people that are not deserving for a better future. I'll give you an example. I spoke to and I wrote an op-ed just this past weekend, a student that I met this past summer or spring, and my question to him was, what are your goals? What are your ambitions? What do you have planned after high school? And he simply responded by saying, why do you care and why do I matter? My family, my community are treated as third-class citizens. I'm treated as a third-class citizen. So why does it all matter? The thing I'm worried about the most is, and after I left that visit with the school, the concern I had the most was how many more of his peers in his community have the same outlook and the same perspective of the lack of hope, relevancy, or purpose. The ability to change that mentality and to give a sense of self-empowerment, to give our youth in particular an ability to believe in themselves and to believe in their own community, is principled by the party that I've realized now is based on an ideology that is based on self-empowerment.
Excellent. Senator Begay, is there a website that you would direct our listeners to if they wanted to learn more about you, or is there perhaps any social media sites that they could log on to view your progress in the legislature?
Oh, sure. My Facebook page is Carlyle Begay. And my Twitter page is simply Carlyle Begay. And you can follow all the things that we were working on here in the state of Arizona to the social media website. But thank you very much for having me on this evening, for giving me the time to share the unique perspectives of the communities that I represent, and hope we can all move these communities forward.
Yes, agreed. Senator Begay, a tremendous thanks to you for coming on to Oklahoma Voice. Warm wishes from Oklahoma to you and your family this holiday season, and we hope that you will join us again sometime very soon.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on today.
Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Goodbye. Folks, it is that time. We want to thank you so much for tuning in to Oklahoma Voice. We are on the air Monday through Friday evenings starting at 7 p.m., and you can find us right here on KTLV 1220. Tomorrow night, we look forward to our guest, Joe Griffin. He is a candidate for the Oklahoma House of Representatives, and he'll be on to discuss his district and his campaign. Also, on tomorrow night, we'll be having Trey Shelton and Justin Wright giving us our Oklahoma City Thunder basketball sports report, so you do not want to miss a minute of the action. And in the near future, we will have Representative Paul Wesselhoff come back on. We were out of time and we couldn't bring him on, but we're looking forward to having him on soon to discuss his tenure in the legislature as he is bringing his political career in the Oklahoma legislature to a close. As always, good night, good luck, and thunder up. Thanks for...
This has been Oklahoma Voice with Jonathan Clour. Tune in Monday through Friday night at 7 p.m. on the TuneIn Radio app, by live streaming at KTLV.com, or by radio on station 1220 AM. Hi, this is Jonathan Clour.